Welcome back to another episode of BHAW Radio. We're at episode 73. I'm your host, Brian Rowan, with longtime co-host Tyler McLeese. Apologize for losing my voice at Sunday's match. We're starting to get it back, but welcoming on the show tonight, we got Tommy Hendrix, class of 2006. Welcome to the show, Tommy.
Glad to be here. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. So Tommy was like I said, a 2006 graduate. He's a former Green Beret. He's managing partner at Decisive Point with a business degree from Columbia University, law degree from George Washington University, loves to go to school. And most importantly, the vice president of the West Point Wrestling Club. So glad to have you on conveniently. I guess we're trying to have you on, right as we're getting close to the Army Navy wrestling match. So a little strategic here, but welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I've been loving the show. Thanks for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, so Tommy, talk to us about the West Point Wrestling Club. Let's start there. Talk to us about what you guys do. We'll go from there.
Man, Tyler just diving right in. No small talk tonight. We're getting right down to it.
Hey, if you've been listening to BHAW, you've heard Kevin talk about it quite a bit. You've heard Todd Messa talk about it. The club is a really important thing that takes care of a lot of the behind the scenes, the stuff that people don't even know that the program needs. For a long time, Todd Messa has been, I won't say a one-man band, but definitely the single driving force to make a lot of this stuff happen. And absolutely hats off to him. And about, I'd say 2 years ago, I reached out to him and told him I wanted to get more involved. And so, if you think about running the program, right? I think even as a cadet, I assumed everything having to do with Army wrestling was paid for by West Point. And then it was only as a graduate that I kind of got a better understanding of how the associate graduate works, what its relationship to the academy is, how things get paid for. And so unlike a traditional university that has an endowment that they're able to invest, and grow year after year and deploy whenever they need to, improve infrastructure or roll out a new program, we actually burn up a lot of our endowment every year in that superintendent's fund. So there's a number of different vehicles that they have within AOG, but I mean, some of them go directly toward funding cadet activities in that, given year. So things like, postseason tournaments, sending folks to go wrestle in freestyle competitions, the prep school coach, these are things that they're not funded by West Point. And so, we have, I think for a long time, had a pretty modest fundraising effort to, bring on some of these volunteer assistants. But, there's a tremendous amount of turnover. We're not able to pay them competitively, out of the small budget we have. And so we've really come to make this push and this effort to make fundraising, part of our alumni's plan giving every year as they think about the charities and nonprofits that are important to them. We want people thinking back on, all that they got out of being an Army wrestler and contributing to the program that way.
So that leads us to next week, the Army, the first annual Army Navy social. Just the info just got released with that for the last in the last couple of days. So, yep. Listeners, fans listening in, what can they expect when they register? Kind of like give us a rundown of the event itself, kind of what you see, and also for me because apparently I'm involved in it now with Coach Ward.
Yeah. So we're going to do 4:30 to 6:30 before Army Navy at the Westin Hotel in Annapolis. We have a conference room. We're going to have an open bar, and we're going to have essentially a fireside chat hosted by BHAW, talking with Coach Kevin Ward about the matchup, the matches to watch, what the road and path to victory against against Navy is, and really beyond that, right? Like, Coach has got to get over to weigh-ins, and we only have them for a short amount of time in the beginning. It's to start to build these events, these collision events, where people from different classes can meet, can engage, get to know each other. I mean, if you're a graduate, you know the deal. You leave the academy for 5 years at least. Your head is down in doing Army stuff. It's an important job. it takes a lot of your time and effort. You're, in a lot of cases, you're starting a family. And it's hard to keep up with Army wrestling. There's a million reasons to lose kind of connective relationships with the program. And we want to have these opportunities for people to come back into the fold. So, if you think about West Point is this incredibly unique institution where upon graduation, we all go do the same job. And if you look at, our counterparts that go to Harvard or go to Princeton or Cornell, right? If you're looking for a job, if you're, going and trying to figure out your next move, there's a tremendous alumni base and relationships that they look out for each other. And that's in industries that are, completely disparate across, different fields, across finance, tech, law, whatever. And we all go to the same job. And I think we do a really bad job of networking, of building relationships across the classes, right? When Tyler graduates from the career course and he goes to Fort Carson, right? He should know what other Army wrestlers are there, and a lot of them are probably already been company commanders. They're battalion XOs. They're lieutenant colonels about to take battalion command. Wouldn't it be nice for him to be able to have a relationship with some of those people when he shows up and help, mentor him along the way? And then the same is true, when you exit the military. Like I said, when I left the military, I had no idea if there was any other Army wrestlers running around Wall Street where I was at the time. So, we really want to build not just the backbone of an organization that's going to drive the program forward, but we also want to, give back to the community, be able to, do exactly what, as West Pointers were supposed to do, right? Grip hands with those classes that came before us and be able to, continue to lift up our, classmates and our fellow graduates.
Yeah, I feel like we need somebody who knows how to code, because I feel like if we could enable it on the West Point Wrestling Club website, like to have like let's say if you went there was like a database where you knew where everybody was located, that's part of Army wrestling. I'm sure there's probably that feature on like LinkedIn or something like that, to where you could sort like by activities or by by location or military base, things like that. Because you go to Carson, there's probably 10 wrestlers there. And
yeah,
you may know like a handful of them, but there's probably another handful that you have no idea were there. And at Bragg, there's probably 40, when you probably only know 15 that are there.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny you say that, because literally just the other day I was at wrestling practice in the morning on Fort Benning, and I ran into John Anderson there, and he's out at Carson too. So I actually made that connection pretty recently, but for the most part, absolutely right. And it'd be really cool to get something like that. So, before you go there, you have a little network for guys that you can reach out to just for all things about the Army, where to live, jobs, stuff like that.
Yeah. I think the reality is people want to help, but they have to know how to help. It's, the same is true when we talk about the fundraising efforts, right? People want to know where the program needs help because they're willing to do it. And so at some point, there's a bit of modesty involved here where we have to, acknowledge that, it would be helpful to have a stronger wrestling alumni network. That's, I think this is the starting blocks. And like I said, for Todd, for me, for, the other folks that are involved in the club, right? None of us can do it alone. It's going to have to be, a pretty big community lift to get, some of those types of efforts activated.
Yeah. Speaking of which, do you want to talk at all about the next level, 2022, where we're at, what classes have done really well?
Sure. I think the classes that have, so just a quick overview, and I think Kevin talked about it a little bit, and maybe Todd did as well. So starting at the golf outing, we announced this year we're going to have a dedicated giving campaign. And the focus was going to be on the lead up to Army Navy, trying to raise $100,000 from October, which is when the golf outing is, until now. We are focused specifically on funding additional coaches, on covering down on the prep school coach, on postseason wrestling opportunities for our current wrestlers, and aspirationally to bring in some RTC athletes that are here to train and continue their wrestling careers. So those are all things that are not funded by the Academy. We think while $100,000 isn't going to answer the mail and all those things, it's a great starting point. I think we're sitting probably around $45,000 at this point. So, we're coming into a little bit of a sprint here at the end, and we've done a couple good events this year. We had our first annual tailgate at the Army Navy football game. We had a great turnout there and raised some money. And don't get me wrong, the intent of talking about the club is not to at every turn to be trying to shake people down for cash. But I think what we're trying to do in earnest is really divide the relationships that we as alumni, as friends, as family of the program have with the club versus have with the program and the team, right? When you as an alumni member want to talk to Kevin, you want to talk about the program. You don't want to be worried and feel like every time that conversation comes up with a coach or a member of the program, it's going to be about fundraising or donations, right? Like, let us do that. I don't have the same, I think, barriers to, trying to guilt my classmates into giving a couple bucks to the program as someone in the program does.
So, kind of getting back to this event next weekend. I know, alumni and friends, but also, parents of wrestlers are going to, more than welcome to attend. I know that parents of wrestlers, I would assume most wrestlers' parents are going to, try to go to the match. So, $50 registration also includes the ticket to the match itself. So, I'm taking my dad, and he's going to really take advantage of the open bar. He's going to put it to the test during that 2 hours. But it should be a good thing. I'm glad you put it together. I feel like these events, they get people together, they get people talking. It's so easy to go into your own world and forget about Army wrestling. But if you can reconnect with a few people when you're going up there, it can make a big difference, especially with you paying attention. I feel like most of us, if we get detached from the wrestling world, we usually come back this time of year. Army, Navy, EIWAs, NCAAs, this like 6-week period is really, 4-week period is, kind of brings everybody back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I won't be able to make it, but I was there for the Army Navy tailgate where we had a bunch of the wrestlers there. And that was a really good time to get to connect with a lot of the guys that I haven't seen in years and some of the guys that I've been watching but haven't gotten the chance to meet. So those kind of networking events to get to talk to other people from different generations of Army wrestling is always really cool. So should be a good event.
Absolutely. Hope to see everybody there.
So, kind of transitioning from there, moving into, this is your episode, we want to dive into your journey, how you became, at the pinnacle as the vice president of the West Point Wrestling Club. You're from the Hudson Valley. Let's talk about your journey kind of coming through. We've had a few other wrestlers come on, from the Hudson Valley. So I guess talk to us a little bit about, kind of your first memories of West Point. Were you, looking to go to West Point from the start? And kind of walk us through that journey growing up in there in the Hudson Valley.
Yeah, so I grew up in Cornwall, New York, which is, for most people, if you're familiar with West Point, Prima Pizza. You've been to my hometown. So Cornwall's right on the other side of the mountain from West Point. West Point was just something that kind of loomed large, for everyone that lived in town. I went up twice a week when I was a kid and was a participant in the youth wrestling program, the same one that my kids go to now, which is, coached by Jesse from, the team. We would come up, we'd watch all the matches. And West Point was always this thing, though, that was held up on a very high pedestal for people that lived in the area. I remember my grandparents who had, lived in that area for, 50 years at that time, spoke about West Point, Douglas MacArthur himself was still there. For my grandfather, who, left school in the 5th grade to deliver ice on a bicycle in New York City and then became a cab driver, or like having a grandchild go to West Point was this unimaginable thing. And to be honest, by the time I was in high school, it was a pretty unimaginable thing for me as well. I didn't have bad grades, but they certainly weren't outstanding. And I had a pretty good relationship with Coach Effner, just from being a local kid, going to the camps, going to the clinics every week. But it wasn't until Coach Giles came in, and Coach Giles, I think he's a New Jersey guy himself, but he had a really strong opinion about bringing in guys from the Northeast. And I remember, he kind of pulled me aside during camp, said, I'd love to have you consider coming to West Point. And we started that engagement there. And I was, the team had just moved into Cullum Hall. And I'd probably be up there every couple of weeks, like checking in, watching practice. Coming into my senior year, Giles left, and Coach Barbie came in. And, Coach Barbie came in, I think, with his own set of recruits and people he had already been talking to. Obviously, Phil is a great example, right? It was clear I was not going to be one of his recruits that year. And then kind of, out of the blue, I got a phone call from him in the fall saying, hey, we're not going to have a spot for you this year, but we have this program where you can attend Blair Academy in New Jersey, which I, of course, knew about, from their wrestling fame down there. And, would you want to do that instead of going to the traditional prep school route? I think he felt my grades were probably good enough that I didn't necessarily need to go to the prep school, but, it was an extra year, an extra opportunity to wrestle and develop. And I'm, really grateful for that opportunity. That I would say that year going to Blair really changed my life. So I graduated high school. I went to Blair. I was there class of 2002. So, that was a powerhouse team. Mark Perry was on my team. Zach Esposito was on the team. And it was some of the best wrestling I'd ever been around, and it was like night and day from my experience in, big fish in a little pond in my local high school to go into Blair.
And you had to reapply when you went to Blair, right? Because I know the prep school guys have to reapply as well. So were you doing that on your own, or were the coaches helping you out with that?
I'd say I pretty much did on my own. Yeah.
How does that, like, I remember, like, when you're at prep school, you do the process, but like, it's a shoe, right. You're getting a nomination. It's a shoe-in, if you pass. Was it a shoe-in, like, in that role where you were, when you're at Blair? Yeah. How does that, like, how do they, like?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say it's a shoe-in, right? It's not like the prep school where it's wired, it's part of a process. But it was funded by the Association of Graduates. And so, I did have essentially a sponsor at the Association of Graduates who was like managing my packet, my application. But yeah, I was definitely still applying to other schools because it wasn't a sure thing. One of the interesting things about my time at Blair, right, is my first day at Blair was September 11th, 2001. And being a New Yorker, that it really hit home. I had friends in high school whose, parents were firefighters and cops. It was a big deal for us. And obviously it was a big deal for the entire nation, but, it definitely hit very close to home. I definitely had second thoughts when it happened about just enlisting instead of taking the West Point route. And that is one time that Coach Barbie did speak to me about, the application process. As he said, don't leave. This war is not going anywhere.
Is the Blair route something that is still available, or is that something that went away?
Interestingly enough, I was at Blair 2 weeks ago, first time since I graduated. So first time in 20 years, for an event. And then I stayed for a wrestling match against Del Barton. I was talking with the headmaster, and he said, it's still an option, but they, now that the prep school's up at West Point, they haven't sent guys to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have there, what other Army wrestlers have went through that specific Blair program? I'm trying to think if
Kurt Pryor went the year before me. Eddie Gibbons did it.
Oh yeah, he did. I forgot about that.
Travis Featherstone, I think, went the next year after that. So we had a pretty good line. I mean, on our team, while we were there, Brian, there were a number of guys that had done it.
Dang. So my year was like the last year it didn't exist.
Yeah. I don't know how much longer they did it after that.
I've seen the Mark Perry Flow documentary Driven like probably a million times. Not a million times, but I've probably seen it 50 times. I watched it like a week and a half ago randomly. And like, he goes in depth about like the differences between, just the lifestyle changes and like that. Was he exaggerating at all in that? Have you seen that?
I haven't seen it.
You haven't?
No.
Oh my God. It's only like 20 minutes long. But it's probably my favorite Flow film. We're not sponsored by Flow either.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was like I said, I look at the folks, I mean, consider like when I went on my visit there, like I stayed with Mako and Corey Cooperman, right? Like, I mean, like these guys that went on to be, super successful. Coach Buxton was still the coach at the time. And I'll never forget like the first practice that I did there. And Kurt Backus, a guy on the team who is the guy who then he took Kel Sanderson's spot after he graduated at Iowa State. And Kurt was, a senior in high school, a year younger than me. And I remember we were doing Coach Buxton, I think, invented CrossFit, by the way, before CrossFit was a thing. I mean, I know, Brian, that you're a big fan. And I just remember walking in and they were doing, full squats and throwing the medicine ball in the air. And Backus was hitting the ceiling in like this 2-story building. And most people were getting it like, halfway up. And I just remember being like, oh boy, this is going to be an interesting ride. There are some animals here.
So I guess transition a little bit to your time at West Point. I follow your LinkedIn. You're very active on there. And you bring up, fairly often kind of like your time at Army wrestling, time wrestling in Army and how dealing with, being, comfortable and uncomfortable positions and what that taught you, so kind of talk to us a little bit that transition into college wrestling, how it maybe, shaped your future success and kind of some of your time at West Point a little bit.
Yeah. I got recruited to wrestle 125 and I left Blair probably weighing 160 or 165. And I remember showing up, our day or Beast kind of ended. And I remember Coach Barbie saying to me, well, we recruited you for 125, man. Let's see it. And I made 125 twice. And I was, dying. I think dying is the effective, the accurate term. I had I think I had at the first check-in you get of your grades, I had like a 0.98 GPA. And so, I bumped up in weight to 133. Believe it or not, at the time, John Anderson was my workout partner. John was a 17-year-old, 120-pound guy. And, now of course he's that plebe at West Point's unrecognizable to the Hulk he's become now. But, so I bumped up to 133, was in the, kind of bounced around in the mix between Bernard Gardner and Patty Simpson and Phil Simpson. And then I think really the next 2 seasons I wrestled behind Phil. And, I had that 4-year career of being a 4-year non-starter. And it's disappointing, as someone who really loves wrestling. But, I think you guys have talked about it a couple of times on the show, right? Like the guys that go in there every single day, knowing that they're not going to wrestle. making weight. I mean, I remember making weight to weigh in behind Phil, knowing there was a 0% chance that Phil was not going to wrestle. You know, I think that experience, you know, was definitely formative for me in terms of doing hard things for the sake of, you know, them being hard for the sake of the team, you know, for, you know, not for yourself. Very little glory in weighing in and then sitting on the bench. But, you know, sometimes a necessary thing, and that's the sacrifice you make for a team. And if there was one thing that was for sure, is that I loved being a wrestler. I loved being on that team. And it was very much part of my identity while I was at West Point. And, you know, you give up a lot to be on, you know, on the team, in the program. Everyone does. Everyone that shows up to that room does. You know, it certainly didn't help my grades. But, you know, it's what I probably wanted to do more than anything while I was there. And all my best friends were on the team, you know. So, you know, what were you going to do? You leave the team and, you know, be miserable without your best friends around. So, you know, it was either, you know, come back for Christmas and do 200-meter sprints till you puke with your friends, or, you know, enjoy your Christmas break without them. So I think I just kept choosing the pain. And, you know, it affects, I think, the way that you approach adversity and challenges in everything you do. So, I mean, one of the things I talk about a lot is I hire athletes. You know, I won't say it's a, you know, a requirement, but we hire athletes here. And, you know, I want people that can, you know, self-inflict that suffering to get the job done without having to be told.
Yeah, well, there's certainly something to be said for being a B squad brawler, as we called it that back when I was there. It became a brand, and you know, definitely resonate with all that stuff, coming in every day and working hard just for the sake of working hard, and honestly just to make other people better and make the rest of the team better. We found a real pride in that as well, especially going out to like tournaments in like a middle school in Pennsylvania and being there Sunday night at 9 o'clock and then getting home at 1 a.m. and going to physics class at 7:30 the next morning. There's just no other lifestyle like that. Cause I mean,
you know, I think it was in Patrick Simpson's BHAW session where he talked about Sammy Henson being there while we were there. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about how, you know, Sammy was like, he was a really mean wrestler. Like if you went on the stairs and called him Paul, he would literally like be banging your head against the stairs. And that was in the afternoon with the whole team there. Well, because I wasn't a starter and thus, you know, expendable, there was a several month-long period where I did not go to normal practice at the end of the day. I went at lunch with Sammy while everyone else went and lifted. And it would just be me and him in the wrestling room. And he would just like absolutely murder me for an hour. And he would have me stand on one side of the room and he'd do a sprint down and back. And he wanted from the second that he touched the wall for me to be shoving him into the wall. And then the drill would start. And like, they were just fist fights some days. Some days, like it was just me and Sammy Henson, nobody in the wrestling room, just absolutely punching each other's lights out. And I just remember being like, this is the worst. You know, I got the Olympic silver medalist just lumping me up every single day.
That makes it even more impressive that you were able to, you know, stuck through all these 4 years. I mean, now I feel like the standard now, not the standard, but like it's way more common that most wrestlers that start as a plebe stay all 4 years. I mean, that wasn't the case. No. That's not the case for most programs. That wasn't the case back then. I mean, I think, you know, your senior class was probably, you know, 6, 7, 8 guys, you know, that's
we started with 21 or 22. And we lost more than half of our class.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, now like this senior class, I think they have 12, you know, there was 12 in this one. I think most senior classes have like, you know, 6 or 7, maybe 8. So, you know, you're one of the one of the few, that made it all 4 years, and not being a starter, that says a lot about your character.
Yeah, I mean, we'd definitely do it again.
So
yeah, go ahead.
So while you were a cadet, in the midst of all that, you also went to SFAS.
Yeah.
When did you realize that you wanted to go SF, or how did that journey transpire?
So, I mentioned my first day at Blair was 9/11.
Yep.
I knew very little actually about the Army. I knew about West Point because I lived so close, but I didn't really know anything about the Army. If you asked me what branch I wanted to go, I would have had no idea even what they were. But we were of the generation that and being at a boarding school at the time, we watched Green Berets invade Afghanistan on TV every night for months, so I definitely knew I wanted to go into special operations. When I got to West Point, I wouldn't say I still kind of knew exactly what that meant. And I remember at one of the sessions where the TACs are telling you about your options for what you can do, I asked about going to Ranger School, and some kid in my company on the debate team or something like that kind of scoffed at it because I was a core squad athlete, I remember my TAC said, "Well, you can't do that, but we are going to have a tryout to send 10 guys to special forces selection." I said, "Okay, well, I'll sign up for that." And they're like, "Well, you can't just sign up, you have to go try out." And I said, "Okay." Just to me, I was like, "Yeah, okay, that's what I'm going to do." So we went, we had this big tryout. I think no one really knew what we were getting ourselves into. And we ended up, getting down to the final 10 by the end of the year. Interestingly enough, I was failing physics, and at the study session before T's, my physics P, who I did not have some close relationships, said to me, "Hey, Cadet Hendrix, I heard you're going to special forces selection." And I said, "Yes, sir. If I pass your class and don't have to go to summer school." And he said, "Good luck down there." I was like, "Well, it's a long shot." And he just looked at me very sternly, said, "Good luck down there." And I got a C in the class, and I'm not even sure that was mathematically possible, to be honest. So we went down there and walked around for a long time and got sweaty and tired and sandy, and at the end was one of, I think, 4 cadets that got picked up to go do it. And they only actually did that program for 2 years. So I think in total, 8 cadets got selected. I think only 3 or 4 of us ended up actually going SF.
If you had to go through SFAS again or fist fight Sammy Henson again, which one would you do?
I think I'd fist fight Sammy. I think because the consequences of
shots fired at Sammy, jeez,
the consequences of getting beat there were lower than if I, for some reason didn't get selected again. Yeah.
But on a serious note, so when you got selected as a cadet, isn't there I know cadets did that when I was there, but I know there was a 5-year window where you had to be available to go to the Q course. Was that the same thing?
No, I mean, we're the first class that had that. And so they might've sorted some stuff out, but, I went to the infantry. And then, I literally got a phone call one day from, special forces branch saying, when do you want to start the Q course and what language do you want? So it wasn't a very formal thing or formal process.
Okay. So you branched infantry, went to IBOLIC, Ranger School, and then you went to the 82nd, right?
So I actually went to the Corps Long Range Surveillance Company in the 18th Airborne Corps.
Okay. How'd that work out? How'd that assignment, how'd you get that assignment?
They were deploying for 15 months, 2 weeks after I showed up on Fort Bragg. So I showed up at Bragg, went and signed into the 82nd. I was told by the S1 there, you're not coming to 82nd, you're going to 18th Airborne Corps. And so like, I'm kind of crushed at that moment, thinking that like, I'm going to go sit on staff for a long time. And then when I showed up at 18th Airborne Corps, they said, no, you're actually going to this military intelligence brigade. So now I'm even like more crushed, thinking I'm going to be, you know, a PSD commander or something like that. And, you know, then I showed up and I'm in this long range surveillance company. Every other lieutenant or captain there was prior service SF. But they needed another lieutenant for their deployment. So it worked out really great for me. I went, you know, right out of the gate, 15 months to Iraq, came back. I was the Halo platoon leader. So, you know, I was probably the only infantry lieutenant to go to Halo school in like a 2 or 3 year period. And then once I had that qualification, I stayed in that job for a long time. So I actually did almost 3 full years as a platoon leader in that unit. And so essentially went straight from being a platoon leader to the career course and then SF.
How do you think, coming from being a wrestler and going through the B squad brawler pathway that we kind of talked about, then transitioning into the military and into a role like that, where you step in and you immediately go to Iraq for 15 months, talk about how prepared you felt for that, or how did it meet your expectations coming from the environment that you kind of grew up in as a professional?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's interesting that they don't really tell you at West Point, but if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, right? Like most of your soldiers, especially if you're in the infantry or in combat arms, most of your soldiers you would have probably been friends with in high school, right? You know, they're athletes. They, you know, they like the same things you do. That's why they're in the infantry. And so, I mean, honestly, being an Army wrestler was instant credibility for me, especially like, you know, you come in, you show up, you weren't there for the entire train up prior to a deployment. And, you know, you just got to kind of jump in the mix and add value. And, you know, as long as I think you can carry your weight and you can do fitness, which certainly if you were a collegiate wrestler, you should be able to do, you know, there's a kind of an instant bond that you're able to make. It gives you something to start with anyway, and a little less of an uphill battle.
That's I didn't realize that. Like I thought there was like some strings that got pulled, or like you were in the 82nd for a little bit and you were like, you know, set yourself apart. I didn't realize it was just this like luck of the draw. You just showed up on the right day and they're like, send this guy to Corps.
Yeah, I mean, I had my entire career path, you know, in the military was very fortunate. You know, from getting selected and then actually honoring it. You know, my time as lieutenant, and then, you know, I really enjoyed my time in SF as well.
So for anyone who's listening, whether it be cadets or recruits or someone who doesn't really know about special forces and the mission set and things like that, talk about your transition from being an infantry officer in a 15-month deployment to Iraq to transitioning to the Q course and the SF community and what that was like.
Sure. You know, so I went into the captain's career course. I went to the special forces qualification course after that. I started out, I learned Farsi. So that was my language. I knew I was going to the 5th Special Forces Group, which covers down on the CENTCOM area of responsibility, or essentially the Middle East. I wanted to go back to Iraq. And, you know, so then it's essentially 6 months of language and then another year of training in unconventional warfare. So, you know, you can think on the spectrum of combat, you know, you can think kind of like invade Afghanistan, work with the local populace through, with, and by, and that's, you know, really our focus within special forces. So, you know, I went all the way through the Q course, and I think I really hit my stride as far as like being in the Army in the Q course. I was the Distinguished Honor Graduate. you know, kind of went from there, like feeling really good about where I was in the military, and, you know, what the future held for me. I knew I was going back to 5th group at a time where things were starting to get hot in that part of the world again. And so it was a good time to be headed back.
So talk to us about your time, you know, at 5th group. You know, you're getting into your stride. Did you end up going back to Iraq, or like, did you go to, you know, Afghanistan at all, or like kind of like talk us through that?
Yeah.
You know, how long were you at Campbell for?
Almost 4 years. So I showed up to 5th group. I actually had a by name request to go to the SIF, which is the counterterrorism unit within each special forces group. So that's the, you know, the one solely direct action focused, you know, urban combat type organization. And I showed up, signed into group, showed up to my battalion, and my battalion commander pulled me into his office and he said, "Hey, we just had an incident with a team leader and a warrant officer overseas. They're on their way back. The team's on their way back because the deployment's over. And I know that we promised you that you'd go to the SIF, but I need you to go to this team because it's a Halo team." And I was, of course, already free fall qualified. And for any listener that doesn't know what that means, basically, instead of parachuting at a low altitude where you're kind of clipped into the aircraft, this is when, like, you know, you jump out with oxygen on and all that fun stuff at a very high altitude. And he basically said to me, if you go to this team and kind of right the ship, I will restart your command time. So, you know, that's very attractive as a, you know, for a commander, you only get, you know, 18 months to 2 years in command. So that's what I did. I went over there. I had a little bit of time before they got back. They needed a free fall jump master. So I got to go back out to Yuma and become a MFFJM. You know, showed up, you know, had the team come back and really just fell right into the position. I will say I was in almost every unit I went to, I was very fortunate that they did not like the guy before me. And so I was like I was met with a little less resistance. And so, you know, had that team, it was definitely a team that was going through some transition. I think they improved a lot during that time. And then, you know, when my 1 year mark came up, they brought me back and I went into the SIF. I started out there in command of the snipers. And then as I, you know, kind of went through a couple more deployments, I got moved up to be the troop commander there. So the way that the SIFs were at the time broken up is it was essentially 3 special forces teams pulled together into one troop. And so we did quite a bit of embassy work during that time. It was right after Benghazi. So Egypt, Yemen, Lebanon, all of them were having, you know, their own kind of little versions of Arab Spring at the time. And, you know, so I got to do some really interesting stuff in that type of role. So, you know, flying into the embassies, you know, worked the partial evacuation of the Lebanese embassy when things were starting to kick off in Syria. And then actually did a bunch of the initial planning for the Iraq response if, you know, as ISIS came into Iraq. And then fast forward another year, we were the first guys to go back into Iraq. So we put the band back together with the Iraqi counterterrorism service and started the air campaign against ISIS in summer of 2014. And that was my last deployment.
That's pretty impressive. I can see why you're in the line of work you're in now, based on everything you've kind of learned through the time, especially, you know, not every, you know, when you think about like PL time, command time, most people have like 3 years combined of both. And you had 6 years. So it's kind of it's very fortunate.
Yeah. And that, you know, that really fit into my decision to get out, actually, you know, is that I had never held a staff position ever. You know, my only job titles really were platoon leader and special forces commander. And, it just felt like it was time to get out. Obviously the restrictions in Iraq at the time were still pretty tight. We hadn't pushed into Syria yet. And my family was ready. As much as I loved it, and I really did love it, at some point it became, a pretty taxing thing. I had 3 kids, who really didn't know me at all. I was gone all the time training. And, the opportunity for me to get out and go to business school came, and I, decided to take it.
Yeah, well, that kind of answers the next question of what kind of led to the decision. So what was that transition like, going from such a high ops tempo in that organization to getting into business school? And did you kind of know what you wanted to do, or talk about your kind of path to figuring out your next step?
Yeah, I think I've always approached things with like kind of a blind optimism. Like with SFAS, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. That was the same thing with business school. Full disclosure for all of our listeners, because we're in the trust tree. My GPA at West Point was a 2.37. This is like absolute bottom of the class. And I had to really work hard to get a good enough score on the GMAT. Kind of really make my case in my essays that that was me 10 years ago, and I've done all these things to kind of both improve, but also to prove that those grades were not indicative of my potential. And I think I was very, very lucky to get in. I think Columbia, they really valued the quality of my service, not just that I was a veteran and they ticked the box, and then we went from there. And so went from that right into business school. It was, I wouldn't say a soft landing, but a softer landing than a lot of other things I could have done. I wasn't out having to kind of battle for a job like a lot of folks. And and that's what MBAs are for. MBAs are for career transition, and there's no kind of more clear career pivot than having been a soldier and then wanting to make the jump in the business world. I tell people all the time, I was really just doing kind of what all misplaced New Yorkers do, right? Like I was coming back to New York. I was either I could have either essentially become a cop or a firefighter, or I could have gone and tried to work on Wall Street. And so that's the path I took.
Did you like the full-time course? Like, were you full-time student doing that, or were you working simultaneously?
Yeah, so I worked at the same time. So I did I was very lucky. I got a job at Blackstone, which is a private equity firm in New York. And they allowed me to go to the Friday, Saturday program at Columbia. So I was, working very long hours in a job in finance. And then, I was doing basically business school on the weekends at Columbia. Talking about kind of transition, I was definitely learning from a fire hose on, in both of those roles. But, I was, like I said, I was really lucky to have someone at Blackstone take a chance on me and, believe that kind of my experience was going to be relevant somehow. So I was learning on the job at the same time I was in school. I think there is some value to having to learn, not just kind of being in an environment where, learning is a luxury.
So I can't help but think now, like how your wife and dealt with this, having kids, like long hours in the military. And then you're like, you know what, we're going to get out of the military. We're going to transition, but I'm still going to work long hours, probably even longer.
Yeah.
Won't be out of
longer. One of the things that I think is lost on us as people in the military about the civilian world. And I learned it, that I would say that I have two kind of key takeaways from my transition. One is that, you're told when you're in the military, nobody works harder than you. thank you for your service. You're the best. That's true, right? Like you're on deployment, like that's not an easy time, but you can't confuse that with like that it's the only career that works hard, right? If you think about, however hard you worked, in whatever your career field in the military was, going through Ranger School, going through the Q course, right? That's something you had aspired to do your whole time, your whole 4 years at West Point. Well, that kid that goes to Harvard and wants to be an investment banker, he's wanted to be an investment banker all 4 years he was at Harvard. And he is willing to do things that you are not willing to do when you get out as a 33-year-old and jump into finance. So it's really long hours. They work extremely hard. They're extremely smart. They're well prepared. Their education, their pedigree really sets them up for success in those types of jobs. And there's a ton that you can learn from your civilian counterparts when you get out. I mean, they are, certainly wealths of knowledge. The other thing that I always tell people about transition is one of the big differences between managers this is another thing that we always hear, like, you're the military, you're the best leaders in the world. Like, yeah, I think that's probably true, but you can't discount the quality of the managers in some of these like high performing civilian roles. And if you think about it this way, when you're a platoon leader, a general's not coming down and telling you, how you should run your patrol, out in Baghdad. That's for a couple of reasons. One is because it's not his job and you need to do your job. But two is that he's never been on patrol out in Baghdad, right? The last time that general heard a shot fired in anger was in the last war, not this one. So they lack a bit of the operational and tactical relevancy. That doesn't mean that strategically they're, oblivious to what's going on the ground, but it's not the same as having been there. If you think about some of these banks, big consulting firms, some of these big high performing businesses, those managing directors, those partners at those firms, right? Not only can they still do your job as well as you can, I mean, certainly better because they have more experience, but they've also lived through 4 market cycles. So they not only do they have the same like type of historical strategic view that a general officer has, they also have the tactical competency and capability to do what you're doing as well as you are. So like you can't fake it with those types of people because they really know, what's going on. They have a tremendous amount of perspective that you might lack as a new employee there. So, you really do. I think that is one of the things, those 2 things that are lost on veterans as they transition, that they're I know I was kind of caught off guard and really surprised by, how capable the other people around me were.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I've actually heard that from, I feel like there are a lot of resources now with like the West Point Careers and Networking Facebook page. And it seems like there's a lot of veterans who have transitioned and kind of drank through a fire hose that have reached back. Because, I'm in the career course now, about 6 years into my career, and a lot of my classmates are starting to make that decision. And I know a lot of people that have made the jump. It sounds like the transition and the opportunities that are there are really good now, having gone through West Point, a few years in the Army, and kind of being an adult now, been on their feet for a little bit. So it's always interesting to hear perspectives, because I think the network that we have is pretty good, and getting to learn from guys like you and your experience and some of your classmates.
Yeah, I'd say that I thought when I got out, people were really going to care that I was a Green Beret. And I would say nobody really does. I mean, that's not true. I mean, people care. But, largely, Green Beret, mechanic, right? Like veteran, served, and everyone's very thankful for that. People cared that I went to West Point, though, for sure. People definitely cared that I went to West Point. There is in some ways, it is that, institutional stamp of approval that you are a smart, capable, honorable, trustworthy person, that, they feel about themselves having gone to an Ivy League school or another, great civilian university.
Yeah. So it kind of moves into, your role now, like starting Decisive Point. Talk to us a little bit about your company a little bit, kind of what you guys do. Give a little plug. I know you guys sponsored the tailgate for the Army Navy football game. So some of our listeners got to see at least your logo out there, but talk to us a little bit about that, what your company does.
Yeah. So while I was at Blackstone, I did get exposed a little bit to the aerospace and defense work that they had done. And it was kind of the first time that it dawned on me, that, this is an industry, a big industry that, there's obviously a lot of money in. But, one that I actually knew about, right? And it's hard when you're making that transition and you're head down and you're trying to, in some ways, I think kind of shed that military brand a little bit, right? You don't want to be the token veteran at a firm like that. But once I understood that there was, this industry that I actually had probably more experience in and understood well, compared to other people with a lot more experience than me, I got really interested in it. And it was, really at that time that people were starting to examine the impact of, at the time, 15 years of unconventional warfare, low intensity conflict. Some defense innovation efforts were just really getting started. And so I was looking at the landscape. I ended up going to a startup, and then I worked as an entrepreneur in residence at a venture capital firm before deciding to start the company. And the thesis is pretty simple, right? If you can bolt on people that understand the government to high potential startups and help them grow in the federal market by leveraging, either R&D funding or government contracts, right? The U.S. government is the biggest single customer in the world. Then you can help them grow more quickly and access a market that they otherwise would have, really no interest or no idea how to access. And then raise capital around those companies and invest in them. So, Decisive Point, more simply put, is a venture capital firm that has a very robust portfolio operations and portfolio services business that helps companies access the federal market, not just in defense, but in health and human services, power generation, energy storage, and critical infrastructure. And it's a very nice mission-focused type of role and business that, I think really allows me to continue to feel like I'm in the mix and maintaining some relevancy and understanding what's going on in national security and in government, but still, it at its core is a finance firm.
Just bring your whole background, everything all together.
Yeah.
Just remember this, your resume, you get to write it. So, it all makes sense after the fact. As you're going through it, you're like, this doesn't make any sense.
Sorry, Tyler, what were you going to say?
No, I was the same thing, just full circle.
So you went back to school again though, going to law school?
Yeah.
What were you just like, I'm bored.
A lot of the guys on the team have heard this before, but I'm made to suffer, as we started the company, I realized that, being a special forces officer does not necessarily make you an expert in the way that the government buys and sells things, the way that the government, does procurement. I have a fantastic team of other people that do know those sorts of things, how congressional appropriations flow down to government contracts. But I was looking for a way to get smart on it. And GW has a government contracts program at their business school. And I reached out and I said, I already have an MBA, but I do have some GI Bill left. And I'd love to just maybe audit some of these classes so I can learn. And they said no. But I got a call the next day from the law school, and one of the deans there said, we saw your resume. We've been thinking about, standing up a program within the law school that is focused on federal procurement law. We don't really have it all fleshed out. We don't have a program yet, but do you essentially want to be the pilot? And so me and one other student basically made a curriculum as we went through, which is now an actual program there. But once more kind of tossed into the fire. So I was in all law school classes for the first year with people who were either actual law school students, like going for their JD, or who were already attorneys going through the LLM program focused on government contracts and federal acquisition. Fortunately, I had majored in law at West Point, which, at West Point is kind of like the easy major. But yeah, I was a law dog.
They don't know that though.
I know. Like, cut that. And so, knew a little bit about what was going on, but I learned a ton in that program, and it's a great program for anybody that is really interested in how government contracting works, and super relevant for what I do now, of course. So
it's awesome.
So kind of, we've talked about you getting back to New York, what's it like, you kind of alluded in the beginning episode, like your kids wrestle, the same youth club that you did, at West Point. Talk to us, growing up, raising a family, around West Point now, has it sunk in? I'm guessing it has, you've been there for a while, but like, you're back home, Katie's obviously far away from where she grew up, but does she feel like that's home now? Are your roots grounded there?
Yeah, I think so. I'm at we live in Cold Spring, which is right across the river from West Point. I can hear the cannon go off every morning and every night. It's a great town. It's a great community. It's nice being close to West Point. But it's always a challenge raising kids and juggling work and the same challenges everybody else has. I think I look back on my childhood, and I'm sure a lot of other parents on that might be listening can relate to this. Is I think about my father, who worked construction all day long and then would still somehow come back and do wrestling practice or coach baseball. I sit at this desk all day, and by the time I get to wrestling practice, I'm definitely some nights not feeling it. So
don't sell yourself short. You got a rogue weight
that's right
over there next to you there. So
Jack and Steel at lunch in here. No, so but it's I think Hudson Valley is a really special place. I think we take it for granted as cadets how what a beautiful place it is that we get to live for 4 years. It's much better being on the outside, looking at West Point from across the river, and not being there. But really enjoy it. Really, like I said, love that my kids get to go over there and see it, and they have gotten to know so many of the cadets over the years. And they're just, of course, fantastic role models. The guys will often come over, watch TV, hang out on the couch, sometimes even when we're not there. And it's kind of ebbed and flowed. Like some classes came over a lot more, and some less. But so the kids have really gotten to know some of the guys over the years, and so definitely thankful for that, because that was something I had as a cadet. A family, nearby that I could go and spend time with and get away from the academy.
Nice. So, kind of wrapping this up, how many episodes have you listened to? Have you listened to most of the episodes?
Yeah, most of the episodes.
What were some of your favorite ones?
Of course, I always enjoy when Kevin comes in and gives his updates. I eagerly await his download from the Lehigh match and the headlock heard round the IWA.
Rumors floating around that he's still smiling.
Yeah, He's still wearing his singlet under his as for class right now. So I love those. I think I mentioned you before we got on. I really enjoyed the Doxy episode. I will 1000% plug his book. Doxy, I think, and Sandy Miller and the other folks at CEP. I'm not sure I realized until I read his book how much of what we learned in that I still just do, and it's just part of who I am. Without even knowing it. And so, I really enjoyed kind of getting to hear the behind the scenes story of Doc and him wrestling at the Pingree School and all that. I thought that was really interesting. All things I didn't know about him. I had the same thing with Todd Messett. I talk to Todd all the time, for the club. And there was a lot I didn't know about his time at West Point. So I think it's really interesting to get to hear some of these guys that, were not in your vintage at the academy, and hear about their experiences. Yeah.
So who do you want to hear in the future? If you're going to pick three guys, yeah. We're asking this now, and it's getting harder because, now we're episode 73.
Yeah.
I want to say there's not much left. We still have, probably 500 people.
Yeah.
To do.
I would love to hear Jack Effner get interviewed, who was the coach in the 90s. And he, like I said, I knew him as a really young kid, but he was just always like such a nice guy. And I think did some really like cool and interesting stuff with the program. If anyone remembers the posters, I had, when I was a kid, all the Army wrestling posters on my wall, and Coach Effner would have the team get out and they'd be like on a tank in BDU pants with boots and their singlet tops, and all having like rifles and guns and stuff. One year they did it on horses and they had cowboy hats and jeans, and that was like super 90s NCAA wrestling. I've seen some of the teams try and bring it back, but I think Coach Effner would be really interesting. So interestingly enough, I wrestled in high school with his son, Jason, who ended up wrestling at Ohio, and that's where Coach Effner went to coach after this. But and then the other one I would love to hear, and I don't know if they could do it just based on like their jobs and what they're still doing in the Army, but you got to have Todd Wisman and Gabe Lucero on together at the same time. For anyone who doesn't know who Todd and Gabe are, they were roommates, maybe all 4 years. Actually, no, not all 4 years, but they were roommates for at least for 3 of the years. They were both nuclear engineering majors, and they were the odd couple. Todd was from Harrisburg, Virginia, and when he first showed up at West Point, I didn't even understand what he was saying half the time. And then Gabe was from New Mexico, and these two guys together is just a laugh riot. But now they're all, they're both out there in the Army within special operations doing great stuff, and they're total badasses. And like I said, they're, physics, they're nuclear engineers, so the brains and the brawn for sure. Neither of them particularly handsome men, so that's what they don't have going for them. But
how I remember seeing you guys at your 15-year reunion this fall. Do you guys have a good time?
Yeah, great time. I think like collectively we're like all godparents to each other's kids, and but I think that they would be really interesting because they both got hurt. Yeah. They both, had ice hurt. I mean, they were everything they did together. If one was going to blow their knee out, like in horrible, traumatic fashion, they were both going to do it.
Where is Todd? Is Todd at Bragg too, or where's Todd at?
Todd's in DC.
Okay.
Okay. He might have to kill me if I say anything more. I don't know.
Awesome. Well, Tyler, you got anything else before we wrap this up?
No, it was great, man. Thanks, Tommy.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing you guys and everyone else at the at the Army Navy match. I think it's going to be a great one. And, you know, to all the guys, I don't know how many of the wrestlers listen, but, you know, we believe in you. You guys have had a hell of a season, tough competition, and, you know, fully expect a win against Navy.
Yeah, we're definitely getting W this year. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Yeah. But awesome. I appreciate you hopping on.
Thank you.
Thanks. BHAW.
Thanks for tuning in to the BHAW Radio Show. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform. If there's something you'd like to hear on a future show, reach out to us on any of our social media, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Or you can reach us at email, bhaw.radio@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and as always, go Army, be Navy.